Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that your entire life savings, the money you'd spent decades carefully building, the nest egg you dreamed about retiring on, had vanished. Not because of a stock market crash, not because of bad investments, but because one guy, a guy everyone called trustworthy, had been running the biggest Ponzi scheme in human history. $65 billion gone. And here's the kicker. Some of the smartest financial institutions on the planet handed him their money without asking a single hard question. December 11th, 2008. Bernie Madoff walks into his Manhattan apartment and tells his sons it's all been one big lie. The man who had been a pillar of Wall Street, a former chairman of NASDAQ, a philanthropist whose name graced museums and universities. This guy had been running a scam so audacious, so brazenly stupid, that it makes you wonder, was he a criminal mastermind or just really good at looking trustworthy while the world collectively forgot how to do math? By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly how Bernie Madoff pulled off the financial crime of the century, why incredibly smart people fell for it, and most importantly, the psychological tricks he used that, honestly, you've probably fallen for too in some form. Because, let's be honest, Bernie didn't succeed because he was brilliant. He succeeded because we, as humans, are hilariously predictable when it comes to trusting the wrong people. And hold your horses, because the real story gets even more absurd than you think. Let's rewind. Before Bernie Madoff became the poster child for financial fraud, he was just a kid from Queens with big dreams and apparently flexible ethics. Born in 1938, Bernie grew up in a working-class Jewish family during the lingering shadow of the Great Depression. His parents ran a small investment firm, though firm is generous. It was basically his mom trading stocks from their living room. And guess what? She got in trouble with the SEC for not filing proper paperwork. Seems like cutting corners ran in the family. Fast forward to 1960. Bernie starts his own investment firm with $5,000 he'd saved from working as a lifeguard and installing sprinkler systems. $5,000. For context, that's like starting Amazon today with the money you made selling lemonade as a kid. But here's where Bernie was actually smart, legitimately smart, before he went full supervillain. He pioneered electronic trading systems in the 60s and 70s, when everyone else was still yelling at each other on trading floors like a chaotic farmer's market for millionaires. He helped create the NASDAQ. He became chairman of it. Bernie Madoff was, for a while, a legitimate Wall Street innovator. And that's exactly what made his eventual scam so devastating. Because by the time he started his Ponzi scheme, and by the way, we don't know exactly when that was, but most experts guess sometime in the early 1990s or even earlier, Bernie had already built an unassailable reputation. He was the guy, the financial wizard, the man with the Midas touch who could deliver consistent returns even when the market was tanking. When Bernie Madoff said, "Trust me," people didn't just trust him, they lined up to hand him their life savings. Now, before we dive into the mechanics of how Bernie's scam actually worked, we need to understand the world he operated in. The late 1990s and early 2000s were a wild time on Wall Street. The dot-com bubble was inflating like a balloon animal at a kid's birthday party. Everyone thought they were a genius investor because tech stocks were going to the moon, and regulatory oversight was about as tight as airport security in the 1970s. The SEC, that's the Securities and Exchange Commission, the guys whose literal job is to prevent financial fraud, was understaffed, overworked, and apparently operating under the belief that rich people don't commit crimes. Spoiler alert, they do. Constantly. So you had this perfect storm. A charismatic guy with a golden reputation, a regulatory system running on duct tape and prayers, and an investor culture where asking too many questions was considered rude. Don't kill the golden goose, people said. Well, guess what? The goose was a hologram, and everyone was eating imaginary eggs. Okay, Let's pause and make sure we're all on the same page about what a Ponzi scheme actually is. Because if you're going to appreciate the sheer audacity of what Bernie did, you need to understand the mechanics. And I'm going to explain this like you're 5 years old. Because honestly, it's embarrassingly simple. Imagine you're running a lemonade stand. A customer comes up and gives you $5 for a cup of lemonade. But here's the thing. You don't actually have any lemons, no sugar, no water. You have nothing. So what do? You take that $5 and you promise the customer, hey, your lemonade is brewing, super special lemonade. It'll be ready soon, and it's going to be the best lemonade ever. In fact, it's so good, I'll give you $6 worth of lemonade for your $5. The customer thinks, wow, what a deal, and walks away happy. But you still don't have any lemons. So when another customer shows up and gives you $5, you take that money and give it to your first customer, telling them, see, here's your $6. My lemonade stand is amazing. The first customer is thrilled. They tell all their friends. More customers show up, hand you money, and you keep using new money to pay old customers, all while pretending you're running the world's greatest lemonade stand. This works great until too many people ask for their lemonade at the same time, because you never actually had any lemons. You were just shuffling money around, creating the illusion of success. That's a Ponzi scheme. And Bernie Madoff? He ran the biggest, most expensive lemonade stand in history. Except instead of lemonade, it was investment returns. And instead of $5 bills, it was billions of dollars from some of the wealthiest people and institutions on the planet. Here's the truly mind-boggling part. Bernie didn't even try that hard to hide it. He had one bank account. One. For a firm managing billions of dollars, he literally had the financial infrastructure of a neighborhood lemonade stand. He had a staff of about 20 people in a back office just making up numbers on fake statements. No sophisticated algorithm, no complex financial engineering, just Microsoft Excel and the audacity of a man who knew nobody was actually checking his work. And you know why nobody checked? Because Bernie's returns were consistent, not spectacular. That's the genius part. If Bernie had been promising 50% returns every year, people might have gotten suspicious. But he promised 10 to 12% annually every single year like clockwork. Rain or shine, bull market or bear market, Bernie's fund delivered. It was the financial equivalent of a friend who's always pretty good at basketball. Good enough to be impressive, not so good that you think they're lying. Except he was lying the whole time, for decades. So how did Bernie actually pull this off for so long? How do you run a multi-billion-dollar fraud for potentially 30 years without anyone catching on? Well, it turns out Bernie had a few tricks up his sleeve, and they're uncomfortably brilliant in their simplicity. Trick number 1, the velvet rope strategy. Bernie made his fund exclusive. You couldn't just invest with Bernie Madoff. Oh no, you had to be invited. You had to know someone. He turned investing into a VIP nightclub where everyone was dying to get past the velvet rope. And here's the psychological trick. Humans want what they can't have. The harder it is to access something, the more valuable we assume it is. Bernie understood this. He'd turn away investors, claiming he was full or that they weren't the right fit. This created insane demand. People literally begged to give him their money. One investor, a guy named Thierry de la Ville-Houchet, ran a fund that invested exclusively with Bernie. When Bernie's scheme collapsed, Thierry was so devastated, he'd lost everything, including his client's money, that he took his own life. Bernie's exclusivity wasn't just good marketing. It created a cult-like devotion that made people ignore every red flag waving in their faces. Trick number 2, the reputation shield. Remember how Bernie had been chairman of NASDAQ? How he'd been in the financial industry for 40 years? How he sat on panels about ethical trading practices? Yes, seriously, Bernie Madoff gave speeches about ethics and how he donated millions to charity. All of that was his shield. When you're questioning a guy who's on the board of your charity, who plays golf with your financial advisor, who's been featured in the Wall Street Journal as a market maker, you feel silly asking basic questions like, hey, can I see proof that my money is actually invested in something? This is called affinity fraud, and it's devastatingly effective. People trust those who seem like them, who run in the same circles, who speak the same language. Bernie worked the country club circuit like a politician working a swing state. He didn't cold call strangers. He infiltrated communities, charities, country clubs, Palm Beach social circles, and let trust and reputation do the heavy lifting. His victims weren't just investors. They were friends, family, community members. And that's precisely why it worked. Trick number 3, the consistent return magic. Here's where it gets really stupid. Bernie claimed to use something called a split strike conversion strategy. Don't worry about what that means. Bernie was counting on you not worrying about what it meant. It's a real investment strategy involving options and stocks that, when executed properly, offers moderate, fairly stable returns. The problem? Bernie wasn't actually executing it at all. He just name-dropped it and hoped nobody would check the math. And for the most part, nobody did. But some people tried. A guy named Harry Markopolos, a financial analyst, figured out Bernie was a fraud in about 4 hours of examining his returns. 4 hours. Harry then spent 9 years trying to convince the SEC that Bernie was running a Ponzi scheme. He submitted multiple detailed reports with mathematical proof that Bernie's returns were literally impossible. And you know what the SEC did? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. They investigated Bernie 5 times and found nothing wrong. Why? Because Bernie's operation looked legitimate on the surface. He had a real business. His market-making operation was completely legit and made actual money. The fraud was happening in a separate investment advisory division that Bernie kept deliberately opaque. When the SEC showed up, Bernie would charm them, show them his profitable trading operation, and the regulators would leave satisfied. They never looked at the actual investment account statements. It's like a health inspector checking a restaurant's dining room and never bothering to look in the kitchen where the rats are having a dance party. Trick number 4, the paper statement illusion. Every month, Bernie's investors received beautiful, official-looking statements showing their investments growing steadily. These statements were fake, completely fake. They were generated by a computer program running in Bernie's back office, churned out by a small staff who were either complicit or willfully ignorant. The trades listed on these statements never happened. The stocks mentioned were never purchased. It was all fiction. But here's the thing. Most investors never tried to withdraw all their money. They'd take out some gains here and there, which Bernie happily paid using new investor money. But the majority of the balance just sat there, growing on paper. And because Bernie's scheme was so big, with so much money flowing in from new investors, he could sustain it for decades. It's like juggling, except instead of balls, it's chainsaws made of other people's life savings. And Bernie somehow kept them in the air for 30 years. The really tragic part? Some investors had been with Bernie since the beginning. They'd seen their initial investments of $100,000 grow to $10 million on paper. They were planning retirements, funding their kids' educations, donating to charity, all based on money that didn't exist. When the scheme collapsed, those paper millions evaporated instantly. Gone. It was like finding out your entire life savings was in Monopoly money. So what finally brought Bernie down? Was it some brilliant investigative journalist, a crack team of SEC agents finally doing their jobs? Nope, it was the financial crisis. The global economy went into a toilet spiral and suddenly everyone needed their money back, all at once. Bernie's investors, spooked by collapsing markets, started requesting massive withdrawals, and Bernie, for the first time in decades, couldn't pay them. Ponzi schemes have one fatal flaw. They require a constant influx of new money.
When that flow stops, or worse, when it reverses and everyone wants their money back simultaneously, the whole thing collapses like a house of cards in a wind tunnel.
By December 2008, Bernie needed about $7 billion in withdrawals and had maybe $300 million in the bank. The math wasn't mathing, as the kids say. On December 10th, Bernie apparently confessed to his sons that the investment advisory business was all just one big lie and basically a giant Ponzi scheme. His sons, to their credit, or maybe just out of self-preservation, immediately contacted a lawyer who contacted the FBI. The next morning, FBI agents showed up at Bernie's apartment. When they asked if there was an innocent explanation, Bernie replied, "There is no innocent explanation." At least, he was honest about something. The fallout was catastrophic. Bernie had destroyed approximately $65 billion in paper wealth, though the actual amount stolen was closer to $20 billion, since most of that $65 billion was fake gains that never existed. But that distinction doesn't matter much to the victims. Charities folded overnight. Retirees lost everything. Families were destroyed. Bernie's own son, Mark, hanged himself exactly 2 years after his father's arrest, unable to cope with the shame and devastation. Bernie was sentenced to 150 years in prison. Basically, the judge's way of saying, die in prison. He was 71 years old. In April 2021, Bernie died in federal prison at the age of 82, having served about 12 years of his sentence. Some victims felt he got off easy. Others felt no amount of punishment could restore what he had taken. But here's the really infuriating part. A lot of the money is still missing. The court-appointed trustee, Irving Picard, has recovered billions through clawbacks from investors who withdrew more than they invested, basically people who unknowingly profited from the scheme. But that process has been brutal and complex. Some so-called winners who withdrew profits were themselves victims, who had no idea they were part of a fraud. It's a mess of epic proportions. And the institutions that failed, the SEC got a slap on the wrist and promises to do better. The big banks and feeder funds that funneled money to Bernie largely escaped serious consequences. Some paid fines, basically the cost of doing business. The system that allowed Bernie to operate for decades barely changed. Because here's the sad truth. The financial system doesn't want to admit how badly it failed. How many checks and balances proved to be utterly worthless. How the experts who were supposed to protect investors were either incompetent or complicit. So what's the lesson here? What are we supposed to take away from the Bernie Madoff disaster beyond don't trust people with your money? First, if something seems too good to be true, it probably is. Bernie's consistent returns, his exclusive access, his refusal to provide transparency, these weren't features, they were bugs. Red flags the size of Texas that everyone ignored because they were making money. Or thought they were. Second, trust, but verify. Actually verify. Don't just accept statements. Don't just trust reputation. Ask questions. Demand transparency. If your financial advisor gets defensive when you ask how your money is actually being invested, that's not sophistication. That's hiding something. Real professionals welcome scrutiny because they have nothing to hide. Third, diversification isn't just smart, it's survival. Bernie's victims often had their entire life savings with him. All their eggs in one basket, held by a guy who, it turns out, was just throwing the eggs in a dumpster and drawing pictures of eggs to show you. Spread your investments around. No single person or institution should control your entire financial life. But here's the deeper, more uncomfortable lesson. Bernie Madoff didn't succeed because he was a criminal genius. He succeeded because we are all vulnerable to the same psychological tricks. We want to believe in magic solutions. We want to feel special and exclusive. We want to trust people who look trustworthy. And we really, really hate admitting we've been fooled.
Bernie understood something profound about human nature. We don't see what we don't want to see. His investors didn't want to see red flags because acknowledging them meant admitting they'd been duped. The SEC didn't want to see evidence because finding it meant admitting their system failed. His employees didn't want to see the truth because keeping their jobs was easier than becoming whistleblowers. The real villain in the Bernie Madoff story isn't just Bernie, it's willful blindness. It's the collective decision to not ask hard questions. It's the belief that rules apply to other people, but not to the club we're lucky enough to be part of. So here's my final question for you. If Bernie Madoff could fool some of the smartest financial minds on the planet for 30 years using nothing but fake spreadsheets and confidence, what are you not questioning in your own life right now? What modern Bernie Madoffs are out there running sophisticated scams, counting on your trust and your reluctance to ask uncomfortable questions? Because I guarantee you they're out there. The methods might be different, the scale might be smaller, but the psychology is exactly the same. Somewhere right now, someone is selling safety and stealing billions or millions or thousands, betting that you won't look too closely, betting that you'll trust the reputation, the consistency, the exclusivity. The question is, are you going to let them?